What is up, guys, and welcome to another episode of Guarani Vision, the first ever podcast dedicated to Paraguayan football in English. As always, I'm Roberto Rojas, and joining me my two great co-hosts, Federico Perez and Ralph Hanna. And guys, unfortunately, we'd like to be in a more happier situation than we were last week, but unfortunately, we have to go on a somber side because Paraguay are officially out of the 2026 World Cup. They bowed out at the hands of France after losing in the round of 16, 1-0 in Philadelphia. We'll talk about everything that we saw over there, what went wrong, what went right, even as well, sort of the fallout, I guess you would say, from the way that we played and the future, because I think ultimately, I think that's now then the next step to all of this. Like we can always get maybe mad or pissed off or anything about the result, but the result's the results, and now we just have to we have to move forward to everything that's going on. But let me go first to Fede right now. We're roughly just a couple of days since that loss in Paraguay. I mean, how's the vibe in there? I know I saw some fans received the team back at the at Silo Petirosi Airport a couple of days ago when they arrived back. So that was really nice to see that they were getting a good reception. But firstly, how is your overall vibe after what we saw on Saturday and just now with everything going on in the country?
Hi, Roberto. Hi, Rob. Hello, everyone listening to Guarani Vision. Great to be back for another episode. And here I am, man, just still wearing the Roja proud, still wearing this jersey because I don't want to take it out. I'm still denying myself that the World Cup is over. We got so much to be proud about, right? I mean, the team never really gave up, and the as they called it at the beginning, the rebirth of this Roja. I was just remembering before getting on with you guys. I mean, that started back in September 2024, right? I mean, when Alfaro managed his first game, that process started against Uruguay, and now you kind of feel that it's over, or at least this 2026 World Cup dream is over as we look beyond this. And I remember doing interviews for international media before the tournament started, and I emphasized, I talked about this team, it was going to give a fight and that the country was going to feel proud about what these guys were going to do. And they really didn't let me down. They went out all out, and Paraguay got eliminated, but putting up a fight just as we expected. Being what we have always been in World Cups, a hard team to beat. So be proud of that. We are again a team that's also in the top 16 in the world. That should always be something to be proud about. And I'm proud about the guys. I was one of those that were watching as they came back to the country. Uh, we take pride of every block, every save that Hill had, even though we didn't attack that much, at least against France. So to my Frenchies, to my friends from France, uh, take it, win, and move on, right? I mean, for me, no hard feelings there, even though I didn't see the best France. I wasn't impressed by the Ballon d'Or Dembele, for instance, in that first half. He didn't do absolutely anything. The whole country's still really mad about Mbappe. We can talk a little bit about that. Mbappe got his ego feeding, at least with that bar and that penalty that he had, because he wasn't happy with the game, right? I mean, most of those French attackers weren't happy at all, but we got so much to look forward to. We got the future looks bright, guys. After what we went through in this World Cup, I think we can talk about our national team and what they've done and just what's coming up. I think everything has gone so smoothly. I mean, a lot of people were having a lot of doubts before this World Cup, but right now, people are really proud of what they saw from their team.
It's very hard, and I'll go to Ralph now on this one. It's very hard for a team to get eliminated, especially with the history of Paraguay, to go back, home and feel like, they are proud of what they've seen because we've seen countries already been eliminated in this World Cup, like Ecuador, like Colombia, like Brazil, like Portugal, among many others, and they're definitely not proud of them. Now, of course, different expectations are given to different countries, but for the sake of Paraguay, who have their history, but you have to remember it's been 16 years that they've been at the World Cup. And so there was always going to be that sort of doubt of what Paraguay was going to have. It's safe to say that they gave us the best of times and also the worst of times in the five games that we saw in the United States. But I think it says a lot. I think that you're seeing much more being proud of the team than being disgusted, being angry. Like, yeah, like I said beforehand, people can be angry and pissed off over the result, but overall when you assess it correctly. And it's a good mention that Fede mentioned of the whole era, the 24 games we saw from Alfaro since that first game against Uruguay. So 24 games in almost 2 years. Um, I think you have to label it as a success, honestly. He did what he was going to do. They got players very much in love with I mean, they got this team in love with we got people in love with the team, the players becoming idols, because that was always sort of the big thing at this World Cup is like, how would these guys stack up against generations before? And I think it's safe to say that after what we saw in the last 3 weeks in North America, that they're right up there, even if the ending should have been better.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think before the tournament, we all did like our predictions, and it was always if they go out in the group, that wouldn't be a good result. If they get to the last 16, then they probably hit where they should be. And we just have the kind of extra boost of the fact they beat Germany, right? Because they could have played in the last 32 a lower ranked team or a team ranked around them. Instead, they got like, four-time World Cup winners, a team full of stars, and then suddenly, by beating them, I think that really wiped out all of the kind of almost embarrassment of the first half against the United States, that going down 3-0 at the very beginning. And so it put us on that pedestal of, oh, actually, okay, I think this is the team. I do believe in these guys. And the more interesting thing when you said, Robert, about idols is who's ended up being those idols, right? Because before the World Cup, you wouldn't have said Orlando Gil. You probably wouldn't have said Galarza. I mean, maybe because he did in the qualifiers show up at important times, but I don't think of all those midfielders you'd be talking about Galarza. And you definitely wouldn't have been talking about someone like Canale. So it's amazing what this World Cup has done for certain players as well. And yeah, I think we're in a position where you can be proud. The way they went out, I mean, there's two ways of looking at it. There's like the defensive side of it, and then there was the kind of fighting almost side of it, right? Which is, because Paraguay really were very physical in that last game. But then you compare it to say Colombia or Ecuador, who've gone out as well around the same stage. I'd be more happy to be on the Paraguay side right now, right? Then, well, especially let's take Colombia just because it's fresh in my mind from yesterday. I mean, yeah, I don't think I'd want to be that team that just went out that way, almost, like missing chances and not playing their best, their best selves. Whereas Paraguay really did what they did best, which was a defensive performance and stopping France from basically having a shot on target early on and not letting them score from open play, which they've done to everybody else in the World Cup so far.
Fede, is it safe to say that obviously we have to wait how Argentina do, but it is Argentina, they are the reigning champions, so anything but winning the trophy would be I wouldn't say a failure, but it would be below expectation. Is it safe to say Paraguay was the only South American team that hit the expectations?
Yeah, I don't like the comparison that much, right? Because each team goes with what they need, with what they think they can do. I mean, for Colombia, for instance, that Ralph was talking about, they were probably aiming to win the World Cup. You see, as many shots as they had in these last couple of games, it's incredible that they couldn't score. So every team has their issues. Every team is a different story. We played our World Cup in the way that we found that we should have played it, a more defensive style, and everybody's talking about that now that we got eliminated. These anti-football, these guys that didn't want to attack, these guys that made it dirty, these guys that made a lot of fouls and that didn't let anybody play. I think, after that first game that we had against the U.S., I mean, we got that reality check, and I think that was something that was also talked in the locker room between the guys, and obviously the staff had to make certain decisions about what they were going to do forward going into this tournament, because they needed to get to the latter stages. They needed to get out of the group stage, just like Ralph said, to have this feeling now after the World Cup, like, okay, mission accomplished in some way, right? And we can move forward from this. We can move on, and we've gained experience, and we have positive things to come out of this World Cup. So for me, I think, yeah, it's been a totally positive World Cup looking at it from the Paraguay perspective, Roberto. I mean, we saw that a lot of South Americans already had issues, a lot of South American teams during the qualifiers, and thankfully we were one of the teams that ended on a high. And as we're ending this World Cup, I think we can also feel that we are on a high with this team moving forward, comparing ourselves to the rest, right? As you look into this South American backyard, there's a lot of teams that are having problems.
Absolutely. So we won't go into too much of how other countries are doing. Let's talk about what we saw in Philadelphia. I had the fortune again of being there, and to say it was hot was an understatement, guys. I mean, I don't know what was because I didn't see social media during the game or beforehand. I was too busy doing my thing, but supposedly I saw it was like 60 degrees Celsius when it came to like the on-field pitch temperature. Like I knew it was going to be hot. It was like 40 degrees Celsius, which is like 100 degrees Fahrenheit here. So it was really hot. I was fine. I did not sunburn. You can see nothing here. But yeah, it was such a big game being there, seeing all the Paraguayans. I remember just telling my sort of like backstory of like they all met up at the Casa Luis Roja, which is like right, they met in like some restaurant which is right near the stadium at Lincoln Financial. And there was a ton of Paraguayans there. Of course, it was always going to be hard to be the majority when you're dealing with a big country like France, but just being there and the pomp and circumstance of it being 4th of July, it was such a special moment. And then yeah, I guess looking at the lineup that we saw over there, it kind of surprised it didn't surprise me. We saw ended up seeing a back five. The biggest surprise, I think, from what we saw from a lineup perspective, Ralph, and I'll go to you first on this one, is that we saw a back five, but we saw Gustavo Velasquez coming in and Omar Lerete coming in as well. So obviously Diego Gomez returned. We knew that from the start, but we saw a back five in this one. And, many people thought to ourselves, okay, was this the right decision? And clearly we did see that Alderete wasn't 100% fit. I think he came in after almost 60 minutes or right before the goal from Mbappe. And then, of course, Enciso as the false nine. You had mentioned over there in your Substack that kind of made it a bit difficult for Paraguay to do something in this game because you feel as if though with Enciso matching up with William Saliba, it just felt like a mismatch from the start because he's just way too bigger. And he was always going to win the balls in high up as opposed to like saying someone like Avalos or something like that. So from the lineup perspective, before we get into the game, and I'll let Fede chime in as well, did you feel like Alfaro made the right choice with the lineup, even if the challenge of France was always going to be a hard one?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, we're talking with Monday's newspaper as it's in Paraguay, right? Like, we're talking in hindsight. But the two surprises, I suppose, is yeah, the back five, and then he didn't play wing back on the left. He just kept Junior Alonso. So when he played the back five against Australia, he brought in Maidana. So it was a bit more of a wing back. So he kept Alonso. Makes sense because you're up against Dembele. But then yeah, to your point, he dropped Canale, the hero, right, of the last game. Not only did he score the winning penalty against Germany, he'd had a very good game. And so he dropped in for Alderete, and it was, yeah, that was an interesting choice for me because eh, in any normal situation, Alderete is, he plays at a higher standard. He plays in the Premier League, so he probably, is more used to the intensity that say the French team would bring. But he was injured. He was coming off injury, and he just hadn't had a great tournament. It wasn't like he was undroppable from the way he'd been playing. So that was a slight surprise. And then yeah, for the Enciso thing, the issue with William Saliba is William Saliba is one of the best defenders in the world at players running the channels. Like he's just so quick. So he wasn't going to have much problems there, and that's where Enciso can do something different. Where Saliba has struggled a bit, and where Gabriel Magalhaes usually helps him out at Arsenal is in the aerial duels. So I think they posted a stat like he only won. I don't know. He'd won like something like 60% of aerial duels. So there was something to maybe gain there if he played Avalos, if he played a big striker. But of course, what Alfaro was trying to do by having Enciso as the lone striker, it meant he could really fill his midfield, right? It was a really very centralized, like compact 5-4-1 because he just really did have just four midfielders like playing very very flat, and then either Galasa or Almiron could jump when they need to on the wings. And then Sousa would just fill back in. It was almost sometimes like a 5-5-0, right? I mean, it was that kind of defensive. So I can see why he did it because it gave them amazing shape, and they were so good off the ball in terms of keeping their shape, marking at the right time, and then the Mbappe problem, right? It was like, okay, Mbappe, he wants to come to the left, so who deals with him there? And it's going to be Cáceres, and Cáceres did a great job, right? But Cáceres can only have the confidence to go tight to Mbappe because he knows Velasquez is next to him, the third centre back. So he can afford, like, if Mbappe does dribble past him, he knows Velasquez is there. But Mbappe is too clever to just try and play one-on-one the whole game. So when he drops deep, it was like, oh, so who picks him up there? Is it Cubas? But if Cubas does that, he's got Barcola and all he's saying he needs to deal with. So it seemed to be Diego Gomez was doing that job a lot. If you notice in the first half, Diego Gomez didn't press very high because he always had like one eye on, I need to fill a space. If Mbappe comes into my space, we have to get there. I think Alfaro said at the end of the game, he said we divided the pitch into four blocks and we basically said like, if the ball is in this block, these are you guys deal with it. If it's in this block, you guys. So he tried to make a very, I suppose, simple defensive way of dealing with such a dynamic attack. And it just worked really well. I mean, people can say it's boring and it's negative, but to date is the best way anybody's defended against France.
And to be fair, Fed, and now I want your thoughts on it. Like, there was a lot to be. I mean, there really isn't too much to go analytically into this game. I think it came out as perfect as we could. France trying to attack and Paraguay just saying, no, enough. You're not going to get past us. It felt as if though many people said it was ugly, it was anti-football. I mean, we saw obviously some of the dark arts as the media has been saying as well. That's a whole different debate. And Ralph, you said on your Substack, so I really like you to elaborate afterwards. But Fede, from what you saw, I mean, I thought the plan worked perfectly well. You're right. You didn't see the best of Dembele. You even see Olise get someone that has always been sort of the man that's trying to connect the ball to players like Mbappe. Really starting those. Being the court of the playmaker and being the conductor in that. And you didn't see the much bunch of him. You did not see as much of him, and it all came from we have to call it as it is, a reckless tackle from Mbappe to Desiree Doué. He was coming in, I think, like 5 minutes in or 10 minutes in. Like he was coming off really fresh, is what I'm saying. And then yeah, we saw basically Mbappe scored, and that's all she wrote basically. But from a pure plan perspective, from what we were gonna see, it worked perfectly well from that end. It just was unfortunate that it ended the way that it did because of a simple mishap from Diego.
Yeah, we made a mistake, guys, and it was gonna cost us, right? I said it before this game. You needed to be perfect, and as soon as the French team threw that first card in there, which was their fast player on this left side, decided the way I was kind of worried because he was starting to hit everybody, and he went through a couple, and the third guy tried to stop him, but ended up touching him in the box. So. And he wasn't going to be the first card they were going to throw out there, right? I mean, they had Turkey already, I think, waiting for his opportunity if they needed him. I mean, they have those kind of players. We knew that situation also. It wasn't just about stopping the stars that were on the starting team. They were going to throw those kind of players at us on the long game. And unfortunately, it went down to that, to a mistake that cost us. I'm so sorry for Diego Gomez. He didn't have a good World Cup, and he also made this mistake. We had a couple of those situations. If you remember the game against Germany, what happened in the penalty shootout with Fabian, and what happened with Tony also, the mistake on the own goal against the U.S. from the Damian Bobadilla. We had those kind of moments also during the World Cup. Thankfully, today we're talking about the good stuff, and it was also going to be part of the game plan, guys. I mean, just trying to take advantage of everything you could, right? Putting the other team nervous was part also of the game plan, apparently. And you saw it right away as in those first plays. I wasn't happy with the starting team, but we had players to at least double up on the French players every time, and those guys were important. I'm talking about Galarza in the midfield. He did a very important job running back. And just like Ralph said, I mean, it was a low block, probably the lowest of the block possible. But with that back line of five, uh, I felt like the defense was also kind of tired coming into this game. So he needed to back them up, right? With Galarza and Almiron tracking back, helping out all the time. Gomez didn't have a fantastic game, like I said, so I was kind of waiting for him or Almiron to eventually step up and try to help out poor Julio Enciso that played as a center forward. It was kind of weird when I saw the lineup because Alfaro, I remember his words before the tournament started, and he said And Caesar doesn't like to play as a nine. He doesn't like to play as a center forward, even though he had to do it in his club also. He doesn't feel comfortable. And when you saw him getting backed up against two huge center backs that France had, I mean, he really had a hard time, and he got banged up quickly. He got tired really fast, just like Diego Gomez and Almiron. So once you saw them having a couple of runs to try to attack, they were gone, right? I mean, just come back and defend. You could see that. But they were smart about it. In the end, it ended up being more of a fight for every single ball, and we had those kind of players with Cubas, with Galarza, with other players stepping up. When Canale came in, I mean, he did a fantastic job again. The amount of Orlando Hills saves that we had in these two games. So I was overall I was happy, Roberto. The way it ended up, just like you said, the game plan, the way it came out. Unfortunately, I think the whole team was tired. I mean, that Germany game took a lot of out of us. If not, it could have looked different. Would have it looked different if we had a strong center forward in there in that first half? Maybe it could have. Should have you waited to put Enciso in there in the second half? Look for something different to throw at the French team? Maybe, but this is all we had, right? I mean, the team didn't build during the World Cup more than into this. Mauricio never convinced our coach to be in the starting lineup even though he was always the super sub. So the way I see it, I mean, we looked into taking this game as long as we could. Maybe penalties was the strategy behind the whole thing because of what Orlando Hill had already done against Germany. But overall, you have to be happy about the way it came out because France was never comfortable and they really had a really hard time against Paraguay.
Now, of course, we can sit and talk about how proud we were of seeing Paraguay, but it seems like the rest of the world had a different idea, and that's where Ralph, I want you to jump in because we did see a lot of, physicality. We saw some of the dark arts, we saw some of the antics from both sides. Let's also admit it. Even though Paraguay has gotten a lot of the hate, obviously, when Mbappe scored his penalty, he didn't give Orlando Gil the sort of love on that as well. I mean, he just scored, so why wouldn't he focus on that end? But nevertheless, there were so many people labeling this as anti-football, as dirty, from all fronts of all spectrums. Maybe South America and Latin America as a whole applaud it, whereas the rest of the world, mainly the Europeans, hated it. You almost feel like, and you put this in your Substack, which I recommend everyone to check out after this, where you say, Paraguay go down fighting, and that the outsiders scrap to the delights of some, but the disgust of others. And I feel like there is that sort of like misinterpretation from all of this, Ralph. There are so many factors of like why Paraguay tried it, why the referee enabled it. We have to call him out as well. Maybe you felt like he was just overwhelmed and just wasn't able to control such a big side game like this. Paraguay were coming off 120 minutes against Germany. Um, there's just so many factors, but I think the big thing from all of this, from at least those that are going to obviously listen and watch this, or are going to interpret it, especially after France do how far as far as they can go at this World Cup as champions, or even before that, we never know. But I think we need to also set the record straight of make a lot of misunderstanding that a lot of the media is saying about Paraguay and how they're being harshly unlabeled.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think. Yeah, it is it's a difficult topic in a way because you have obviously like almost two different worlds of deciding or understanding. But the main thing is when just to give the example when Maradona scored with his hand against England. It was Bobby Robson called it like the hand of a thief, and obviously Maradona calls it the hand of God, and it was almost seen as but it was crafty, it was clever, and that's the first thing I think some people did get a bit carried away because people were talking about like it was too physical, but honestly like there was a lot of very like uh chippy kind of stuff, but there were there was nothing aggressive like injury that was going to cause injury or anything like that.
There
So
were
that
some
was
people that were
like.
saying it was a disgrace to the sport. I'm like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, I think that's getting a bit, that's an exaggeration, right? That's because that's not what happened. Like, if we really go back to, like, for example, the Avalos elbow to Upamecano is like, that's not going to break his rib. That's just going to annoy him. And the whole Galasa stuff he must have been so annoying to play against. Like, I would hate to play against Galasa, but he was doing that on purpose, right? I mean, that was his point. So that's the first thing. It wasn't none of this was like, could have caused injury or something like that, which would draw the line because obviously player welfare is something else. This was just being really annoying for the other team. And then the way Paraguay said is that survival instinct. That was like, I mean, how else are we able to try and even up the game? But then I think there was some strategy and tactics in it because of the referee choice, which I mean, again, the referee, he was really bad. He just lost control of the game. And maybe he could have controlled it by an early yellow card to Paraguay because he gave one to France, if you remember, but he didn't even up. But the main thing about this referee is he was the referee for France against Argentina in the Olympics. I think a lot of people overlooked this. And in the Olympics, Argentina did a very similar thing. France came out 1-0 winners. And at the end of the game, there was a huge like brawl. Thierry Henry had to come out and apologize. Thierry Henry was the coach. He had to come out and apologize for his team's behavior, even though they won. But it was partly because that ref had let the game get away from himself. He'd also done the same thing in Paraguay against Mali in the same Olympics, in which many of this Paraguayan squad played, at least I think 4 or 5 of them. And it was the same thing. Like he let stuff go, and so the players start to take things into their own hands. So maybe Alfaro said, you know what, I remember that game because I think by then he started following Paraguay at the Olympics because he knew he was taking over, right? Or he'd already had agreed. I can't remember, but I think Alvaro was thinking maybe we've got something here because look at how they reacted, and we're not talking about like France under 23s. We're saying it's Olise, is Doué, is Cherki. They're all in that team. Kone even gets booked in that match, I think, in the France Argentina one. So he's like, these are actual players that I've seen. This has worked with this referee. So maybe there's something there, and this is professional football. It's not we're not there to entertain, right? We're there to win, which is maybe also where a lot of neutrals got very upset because the neutrals wanted to see a really good game, and Paraguay's like, we're not here to make this fun for you. We're like here to try and win and get to the next round of the cup. So yeah, that's where I saw some of the difference and maybe that misinterpretation. But again, like just to be clear, like there was nothing in that Paraguay team that was a danger to France. Like no way. It
You
was
play,
very annoying. And yeah, maybe you shouldn't scuff the penalty spot, but I don't think at no point was like player safety or welfare at risk there.
you play to win the game, Fede. That's all I could get from this.
Yeah, and what did France think we were gonna do, guys? I mean, they really thought we were gonna respect them in a game like this. Come on, this is a World Cup. You're going up against a South American team. We're all like this. It's not just Paraguay. If they would have gone against Uruguay, it would have been even worse for them. Especially that Uruguay team of like 10 years ago, right? That would hit you all the time. I
Oh,
mean, yeah,
against Spain, and we saw that too. We even saw that in the Spain that kind of got chippy there when they got eliminated.
yeah, it all happens all the time. Europeans don't like it. They want the ref on their side. They get all those calls all the time in their clubs. That's why they're all doing all those dramatic stuff. And when the ref is bad, you take advantage of it, guys. I mean, he missed that penalty. The VAR ended up calling. He let the players go back and forth, just like Ralph was saying. So the game got heated up because he let that happen from the start, from that first back and forth from Mbappe that started laughing at our players, and our players didn't like that, so they went straight at him and a couple of others also, and we loved that reaction because the players, they didn't help back, they didn't get small on the situation, and they really showed their stuff, they showed their character, and no matter if we were gonna get a red card, we were gonna get it, and because we deserved it, but France really thought. I don't know what they thought. They thought we were going to respect them just because they've been to the World Cup finals, that we were going to see Mbappe and we were going to get scared. That never really happened.
What was it? The
And the
tuxedo
back,
quote, wasn't it? The tuxedo quotes. They thought, oh, we're gonna bring our tuxedos or something like that.
yeah, I heard Mbappe. He was really heated up after the game, but the backlash was going to happen also, right? I mean, after what we showed against Germany, it was going to be a more defensive team even against France. So people weren't going to like it. It wasn't about the business for us. It wasn't about show. It wasn't about playing pretty football. It was about making it as hard as we could against a top team like an elite team like France. So we knew what our place was in this game before we even played it. So we knew what we were going or we were going to get ourselves into. So I don't know. I really don't think France knew what they were going up against. Just like it happened in 2010, right? When we hit Spain several times. That game I think was way more dramatic, guys. I was thinking the other day, right? I mean, that game really had us on our seat. We had penalty opportunities. We had several chances. This one was very different. I mean, this one was just all defensive, all stops, and that I was taken back to that 2010 all the time. But to be honest with you guys, that 2010 game against Spain was way more exciting for us than this one.
It's like it's always like that in a way, Ralph. Going back to history, 98, sort of those glorious defeats, losing to France with a golden goal, 0-2, like I said, Germany losing in the last minute, Spain, of course, with all that happened, and now this, it is never Paraguay obviously lose in the really most dramatic way and probably the most gut-wrenching way, but they always leave their head to lie, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that's why when Paraguay showed up on Monday morning in Asunción and it was freezing cold and everybody waited outside for them to kind of receive them as heroes, the reason is because of the way they lost. Because no one realistically in Paraguay thinks they're going to win, right? The World Cup. They're not going to win. So they know that at some point they're going to be knocked out. Don't let it happen early in the group stages, but also when it does happen, make sure you go out in the manner that they did, right? So they went out fighting. I mean, you could say quite literally, but they went out doing what they do best, right? They didn't try and be like if they tried to go head to head with France, they would have lost 5-0. If they had tried to not maybe be quite as aggressive as they were, it would have been maybe like the Sweden game we saw where France really just walked to a 3-0 victory very easily. I mean, they went out and they gave France the hardest game. So a couple of things that's interesting, like Deschamps had to make his earliest substitution he's made at the whole World Cup, which was Doué coming on. So that's an interesting fact. And of course, it's Doué that wins the penalty. So well done, Deschamps. It worked for him. But also, I think this is partly because Paraguay ended up like protesting the penalty and it took so long. But I'm pretty sure it was the latest France have scored in a game as well. It's definitely the only time they haven't scored from open play. So, I mean, all of these things that Paraguay did that may be seen as negative, but it got them to a place that no one else has managed. And like I say, it gets Paraguay to the place of saying, okay, we lost, but you cannot say, we gave up an inch of grass to them. We played as hard as we could that whole game. We played. We were injured. We were still playing, which is in the case of Alderete, right? Maybe he shouldn't have started, but hey, he did, and he gave it as much as he could basically keep going on for. So that's what people wanted to see, and I think that's why in Paraguay they did get the heroes welcome, and then maybe yeah they're not at the 2010 level. So thinking about that Spain game, partly because they didn't make the quarterfinal, but partly yeah we just didn't see that nice balance. We wanted to see some of the balance, right? So if you go back in that whole game, the best chance Paraguay had probably is Diego Gomez had like a volley from outside the box and he just totally missed it. And that's really the closest they got. 2010, of course, you have the penalty, the Taquara misses, and Roque had the one-on-one. There was actual like chances they could have scored. So maybe that's what's missing to put them up as the historic team. But hey, they've definitely gone out, like you said, Roberto, like those historic defeats is one of those glorious ones that they're happy about.
I'll finish off with that on this statement before we get to like basically our MVPs of the whole World Cup and who really underwhelmed. But Fede, everyone, one of Paraguay's most famous songs is Adelante y Roja Adelante, and in the lyrics it says peligroso, ofensivo and veloz. It was far from any of that at this World Cup. 3 goals in 5 games. Even the Paraguay teams beforehand would always score a lot of goals. We did not see that here. It was one of the worst, and I mean one of the worst. If you check the stats, it's been one of the worst low scoring, maybe the worst low scoring team at the entire World Cup of the whole field.
Yeah, it was fast, but we weren't there to score. Unfortunately,
We were
that's the weirdest.
dangerous. We were dangerous in other ends, just not on the attacking end.
Yeah, but even from set pieces, I was waiting for much more from this team, and we didn't make much of them either in the games that we had. So you have different ways of attacking in games, and it's kind of weird, right? I mean, we always talked about how many forwards are we going to take, how many center forwards, and he ended up taking four, and he never used more than two of them out there. And at a certain point, I was thinking to myself, I think we should have gone all out. We could have gone all out in certain games, and the coach kind of held back. I don't know if he didn't want to just lose badly, if he didn't want to make this team look ugly, or make them have an ugly win heading into the future, because most of these guys are going to get an opportunity again. I mean, you look at this squad, most of these guys are going to make it to the next World Cup. They're going to be here again in 2030. So for them, it was the opportunity of not just making it to the World Cup after 16 years and making the country proud. It was about gaining experience. It was about having the opportunity of playing against these elite teams and learning how to do it. Now we got to take it to the next level, which was something that we couldn't do already in the friendlies. We saw it after the qualifiers, guys. I mean, Alfaro tried it. He played differently. He tried to attack a bit more, but the team didn't show much. And so we had to go on a different road, right? I mean, yeah, you could have put more strikers in there. Would have liked to see Alex Arce, the top Libertadores striker. I would have loved to see him more of him. Would I have loved to see Tony Sanabria coming hot into the World Cup scoring? I would have loved to see it, but it wasn't reality, right? I mean, we had four center forwards, but the opportunities they got, they didn't make much of it. Avalos played, Pita played, they all played, they all had their opportunities, but nobody convinced Alfaro. They didn't get much chances, so it was really hard. It was really hard to get really opportunities. It was hard to get chances for them. So I think we got to talk about the future, Roberto, because Alfaro really talked about that, right? I mean, am I going to get those players? I want three Roques, I want three Tacuaras, I want players in Europe. He always mentioned that during this World Cup. He didn't have enough.
He doesn't, but we'll have to see if this World Cup kind of helps him because, I'm going to talk about our MVPs now before we get into the future. But I think it's safe to say that, maybe we have a similar top three. I don't know. I'm curious to see what you think. But I think my top three from this whole thing, and Ralph, you kind of alluded to it at the beginning, is yeah, definitely Orlando Hill for me is in there. I think he is number one. I think being the hero of what he's been doing, having those great games against Turkey and then against Germany even against France, he kept them at bay, just one goal. It was a set piece goal, no goals from open play from arguably the best team in the world. The penalty heroics. I mean, the fact that he is going to be remembered as the first goalkeeper to eliminate Germany from a World Cup, and I think he is one of the first goalkeeper ever to save penalties from Germany in their history of penalty shootouts in all competitions. I mean, that puts you up there. And I think obviously his age kind of helps him as well, that he could get a big move. I'm sure he will. It's just a matter of whether San Lorenzo are going to budge for that. I think it was like 10 million asking price or something along those lines. But, he's 26. He's still young. I think he's definitely got his future with him. In the national team, I think the same could be said for Matias Galarza. I mean, what a tournament it's been for him, from River Plate outcast to, even Atlanta United couldn't find a space. And then, everything that had been talked about him about saying he wasn't in the best morale space. And there he is having one of the great games, having the great tournament, scoring against Turkey, having the good performances he did against Germany, setting up the assist. And of course, maybe hard to play against France, but I think certainly people will remember him. And now he will get his move probably soon. We'll see. And I think by third one, it's hard because you could have said Julio Enciso for, being that kind of effective player that he is, but you kind of felt like maybe there should have been more from him. The same could be said for Juan Cáceres, but even the game against the USA had put him in that kind of low stock. Mauricio could be mentioned, but I'm going to put Andres Cubas. I think he's someone that deserves all the attention, given the fact that he has always been sort of the same player. It's hard to find a bad game from him overall during this whole process. So those are my top three of who've impressed me. The I guess you could say the top three. I guess the underwhelming three. I think I have to say Diego Gomez. I did not like much of him. I have to say any of the strikers you would have to put in that combination. And a third one, oh God, I don't even know who to pick. Yeah, why not? Second and third, that could be mixed up with strikers. That's my top three of underwhelming players. What about you?
I mean, yeah, Orlando Hill is number one because he's the only player I think of this whole group that has come from, like, I'm not even sure if you should be in this team to, oh my gosh, we cannot drop you, right? Like, Kuvas and Encisa and people, they were already established. The way Hill did it on the world's biggest stage was really impressive, and he's kind of solved a problem for at least 4 or 5 years, at least, right? At least until the World Cup, like you feel problem solved with Hill, and unless something goes crazy wrong. But usually with goalkeepers, that you're on a good trajectory, right, at his age. So I think Hill is easily number one. Yeah, I think Kuvas is number two. I mean, he was the best player in the qualifiers. He's the most important in that position. And again, he was just so key to the whole balance of the midfield. And yeah, he would just show up, right? Like, when you're like, oh, there's Kuvas again, and he's just won the ball back. And then, I mean, third, so it could be Galatasaray. Do you know who I put actually number three is actually between Enciso and this guy, but I think I'll go for Miguel Almiron,
Okay.
because the thing about Almiron is he's just he's just become such an intelligent player for when the few times we do have the ball, which wasn't very often. He was making some good decisions in terms of sometimes I need to carry it, sometimes I need to make a pass, and then just defensively. I mean, that was a big difference, right? Switching him from playing on the left to the right, because he played on the left against the US, switched over to the right for the rest of the tournament. That really like protected Juan Cáceres, which allowed Cáceres to have quite a good World Cup as well. So I think I'll go with that. And then yeah, the three. I mean, for me, Sanabria it was difficult to watch Sanabria because when Sanabria is not playing well, he looks like he's not trying. I don't know. I mean, I don't know his mentality or what he's doing, but the way it looks to you on the TV screen is like he's not really like what's he doing kind of thing. So it can be very frustrating to watch. And then he missed his penalty. He didn't even put it on target. So I just a really bad World Cup for him. Um, the other ones, yeah, I don't know. Like Diego Gomez was not as good as I was hoping for, but
Do you think
in
it
a
was down
way,
to the injury? Do you think it was down to the injury?
I think yeah, I think with Gomez, and it's the same as Alderete, coming from the intensity of the Premier League and having all of those minutes racked up. And in Gomez's case, he got injured like just before the end of the season, and then so he didn't get many games back in. And I think in Alderete's case, it sounds like he was carrying an injury, and then it kind of came off in the end with the actual games of the World Cup. So yeah, it's a bit unfair, but he didn't have a good World Cup. So I think Gomez, and then you need me to put another one in there. Um, yeah, I don't know because I would have said Bobadilla, but then Bobadilla really came back in the Germany game. I was very impressed with his resilience, the way he came back in that one. So I don't know if you give me a third one.
That's what I'm saying.
I'll
You could
just
do all this. You could put all the strikers into one.
yeah, just throw in all the strikers because they didn't score a goal. Yeah, let's do
Ped,
that.
Ped, do you want to be more brutal or giving praise to any of these guys?
Oh, of course, I'm going to praise several of these guys. I mean, they're idols now here in the country, and several of these guys. I mean, I think between Jose Canale and Orlando Hill, those are the guys that people are loving the most right now after this World Cup, especially with Canale scoring that important penalty, kicking that important penalty after two of his teammates missed them. But I'm not going to put him in there because he wasn't in the starting team. He only put his fingerprints on a couple of those games. So, yeah, the obvious answer is Orlando Hill, but I'm going to go with Matias Galarza in that first spot, guys, just because Galarza showed me that mentality, that attitude that I want to see from a midfielder. And he was the only one that really had that to really become a starter. He went into this World Cup thinking to himself, I'm gonna show my stuff when I get an opportunity, and he really showed his what he can do with this team, and he already did it in the qualifiers. I believe he was starting to earn his minutes, and that's why when he came into this team, there was no way he was getting out because he was bringing in so much and he was helping out in so many details, and he was all over the place. So for me, physically, the intensity in the midfield, it was between him and Kubas. I mean, so So Cubas is also in there in the top three with Orlando Hill, Matias Galarza, Orlando Hill, and Andres Cubas in that order. So two midfielders and the goalkeeper. The goalkeeper, obviously, just like I said it, I believe after that second game, he's growing into the spot. Even though he had that first game, everybody had that first ugly game against the U.S., but he bounced back from it and he really showed some leadership. He felt more and more comfortable as the starting goalkeeper, and now as we move forward, nobody's thinking of anybody else besides Orlando Hill. So you got to feel really happy about that, especially with the whole story and everything he's gone through to make it to that place. So after the World Cup, we got to say Alfaro made the right call, right? I mean, looking at the three goalkeepers, one of them, Orlando Hill, is the one that stood out. And players that let me down, Roberto, I mean, injuries and just not being 100%. You guys said it. Diego Gomez was one of them. Would have been different if Diego was 100%? Yeah, probably, because we saw his potential during the season with his team. Tony Sanabria is another one. What did Tony do this last 6 months to come into the World Cup like we needed him? That and he wasn't ready for it. You saw it the first game. That's why he never came back into the team pretty much. And Ramon Sosa is another one. He wasn't available. He wasn't ready for it. Why was he even on the squad? People are even thinking now after the World Cup. Did we take an injured player? Did we keep certain players that were injured during the World Cup? Should we have changed them? And you kind of get that feeling with Ramon Sosa, right? I mean, he never practiced with the team, or when he did, they took him out right before the game, and it was kind of weird for me, Ramon Sosa, that I wanted to see much more from him in the World Cup. So for me, Ramon is also one of the guys that kind of let me down.
And of course, this is something that we're gonna have to see what happens in the future games because now we're getting into our final segment is the future because of course after every World Cup, it's time to reassess what's next. In Paraguay's case, it is very much different as opposed to most of the rest of the field because they are one of the six co-hosts of the next World Cup, meaning that they will qualify for 2030, meaning that they don't have to play qualifiers. That being said, there are still tournaments that are going to be happening. There is also the possibility of them still playing the qualifiers, but for a tournament with Europe, I think even Robert Harrison has been saying, that they could possibly play the World Cup qualifiers to participate in a tournament with Europe, which allow them to prepare. There's the Copa America that happens in 2 years' time. It looks like it's going to be again in the States. When are they going to host the Copa America back in South America? Maybe never. Who knows? Anyway, besides all that, there is still ways to figure out what Paraguay can do. And of course, I think the big one, and I'll go to Ralph on this one, is Gustavo Alfaro. Because everyone, as soon as that World Cup ended, was thinking, okay, is he going to stay? Is he going to leave? There had been a lot of rumors and a lot of flip-flopping from everyone ever since he took this job that Alfaro had said. I even remember when I was at one of the training sessions saying that this would be his last job, that he would go to the World Cup and then retire. But then it seems like Robert Harrison and a lot of members of the APF are saying, no, 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 let's try to negotiate something and have him here for the long term. But the one thing that he did, of course, stress is that he didn't want to just be part of this team, but he wanted to have a sort of process, a process to make sure that Paraguayan football is in a good spot for 2030. And I think that that's going to come down to that. It's not monetary. It's not what commitment on that end, Ralph. It's to make sure that, Paraguay is in a good spot to have this sort of process for 2030.
Yeah, it's well, yeah, there's a lot of points there, but yeah, firstly, the Paraguay has qualified for the World Cup is I think huge because then it gives the APF, the Paraguayan FA, this way of thinking like, do we need Alfaro or is this time that we switch? And the reason I say that is because Alfaro has proved himself to be he's like the best manager when you're in trouble and you need help getting like dragged out and like lifting your level. And that's exactly what he did at Paraguay, and he's great at that. And then the reason why Alfaro has maybe been known more as a manager for mid-table teams in Argentina and maybe not the very biggest because I think he got one chance at Boca, but he's not like always in around the big five, is because he doesn't play that attacking football. So people don't see him as the manager, to then win titles, right? So now Paraguay is a much more attractive proposition than 2 years ago than when Alfaro took the job. When Alfaro took the job, no one wanted to come to Paraguay because pretty much the team had come off that terrible Copa America. No one really knew what the money was like in terms of, investment. No one was really sure about the youth players, even though they'd been to some youth tournaments, but it wasn't like, is there a definite group of people I can take? And so what Alfaro really did was he looked around at players that were old, like Canale or Gustavo Velasquez, that were kind of, had experience but weren't European elites, and he brought them in and he got the best out of them. So that was a position 2 years ago. Now it's like maybe Paraguay can shoot higher than an Alfaro. But then there's the other question of how do you get better than the guy that's done all of this in 2 years and everybody trusts? So there's a big decision to be made. There's also politics, of course, that you think that no one wanted to be Paraguay coach. Well, no one wanted to be president of the Paraguayan FA because it was a terrible job. Now it's a very nice job to have. So Robert Harrison is, he was basically kept this job because no one else wanted it. Even he didn't want it at one point, right? He was like, I'm going to stand down. And everyone's like, oh no, stand again. Paraguay's just made $15 million, right? Or $16 million. There's all the sponsorship from the World Cup itself. All the investments gone into the high performance center for the national team. They're in a very nice place. So this is a very nice role to be in charge of the Paraguayan FA. Again, not just for the money, but the potential of what it brings. So you might see a candidate that comes in and says, "Oh, actually, I want to challenge Robert Harrison." I can't remember when it's up. I think it's in 2 years. It's definitely before 2030, right? So, with that in mind, when a new candidate comes in as president, often they try and change the national team manager because they get their person in and they want to make their change. So, there's a lot that honestly could happen between now and 2030. But yeah, to your point, the first thing is, does Alfaro want it? And I think from what I understand, he does now because he's seen some of that potential during this World Cup. The question is, does his family? I don't know. He pretty much had said, "I'm going to retire," right? So now he has to deal with the wife and kids saying, "Hey, didn't you say you're going to retire? Now you're still going to live in a foreign country." So there's stuff to work out there as well. Um, but yeah, I think for now, if Alfaro wants it, he gets it because of Harrison, the president of the FA. But don't be surprised. Like 4 years is a long time. I don't think it's guaranteed he's 2030 coach.
Fede?
Yeah, I think he needed to see something in this World Cup to move forward, right? And I think he got that. I mean, in certain games, especially in that game against Germany, but in this game against France also, I mean, the team responded to what he wanted, to his strategy and the way that he wanted them to play. So the coach must feel like in certain ways that he's happy with what the team gave him, right? So I think he's gonna move forward, even though he's gonna get many opportunities to coach and manage other teams. I think he's gonna be looked at, and his manager is gonna get a lot of phone calls during these next couple of weeks. But you can see that his heart is here, guys. I mean, he's always talking about that. I mean, the special bond that he has with the fans, with the team, with the president, with the FA, with everybody. I mean, Alfaro just seems like he's in love with Paraguay, and Paraguay's in love with Alfaro and what he's done so far. So I really don't see anybody else right now. If he says no, or if you want to look for another name, who can you take on top of Alfaro, and so people won't miss him? I mean, that's really hard to look at in the market. So I think the FA has to do as much as they can to see if they can move forward with Alfaro right now, just because of what he has brought to this team and just how he has brought everybody together. So free for friendlies in September, Alfaro needs to be there. And Copa America 2028, Alfaro needs to be there. So for me, it's just about that. I mean, just moving forward, start seeing new players, maybe putting young blood in this team, and see if they can start evolving in good friendlies, and really take note of what he's been saying lately, guys. I mean, you don't usually hear the coach of a national team talk about the National League and what they need to change to have a better national team, but he's been talking about it. He's been involved on that, and he doesn't like the level the Paraguayan league currently has. That's why we barely saw any of those players in this national team as they went to the World Cup. So there is a lot of things that need to change in the Paraguayan league. Are they going to listen to him? Are they going to take notice of what he wants changed in these 4 years that we got coming up? Is 4 years enough to change as much as he wants to change? If it didn't happen in 16 years, why would it happen now? I mean, that's the way I look at it. Those are the questions that I'm making myself right now as I listen to him and what he demands from the FA also. So we'll just have to wait and see if he thinks that he has enough, because I'm getting vibes of, just like I did in Martino days when he left the national team after that Copa America final. This is all I got. I can't give more than this with this team. I'm not gonna go beyond this. So hopefully in a couple of months we're thinking to ourselves that no, there is more to this team. That there are players that are gonna start to shine and players that can get into the squad and make a difference. But as of right now, I have my doubts going forward. But there's something that I don't have any doubts about, that it needs to be with Alfaro. It needs to be with Alfaro.
I agree. I think we can all say that it has to be with Alfaro. I don't think anyone else is worthy up to the job at the minute, but I do think that, he's just gotten, I think the most important thing of it all, guys, is that the players have always warmed up to him, that he's always enjoyed being coached by them. I've never heard a negative thing from any of these guys beforehand. And I think, similar to the coaches, to the players that got, like Tata Martino 16 years ago, they're going to view him as a father figure. His, his one of his press conferences that he mentioned after we lost to France was, that these boys, a lot of them don't have fathers. So in a way, without getting too emotional, that this is probably the father that they never had. He is, yeah, basically just someone that I think is someone that has gotten a lot of love. And at the end of the day, you can't change everything that he's done. It would be great to keep someone forever, but as all good things do come to an end, I think in a situation like this and the opportunity that comes, there is a way to continue going on, especially in a home World Cup, Ralph. I think that's also the one thing to do. I think, yeah, of course, there's a lot of things that are going to happen until September. September is the first friendlies or scheduled friendlies, you would say, for Paraguay for the FIFA dates. So, a little over 2 months basically. Which is, it feels like a lot of time, but also very little time as well, because you think to yourself, yeah, World Cup ends, then you got the league season starting, and then yeah, you get another break. And I think there's like a new change in the FIFA dates or something along those lines after this, but that's a whole different story. But yeah, I think it would have to be sticking with Alfaro and just seeing how they can prepare on that. And I guess the next question to you to close it off is, do we keep the majority of these players? Do we bring in some new blood? What are we going for this as well? If you were in Alfaro's shoes, Ralph, let's put it in that way. If you were in Alfaro's shoes, what would you use the next friendlies to come in? Do you take out the previous players that we saw at the World Cup to give more break, or do we continue to keep those ones, but with also adding in some new players that missed the boat or are just coming up as well?
Hmm. I mean, in September, it's pretty much going to be the same side because yeah, we can't there's not that much difference, right? We might see a few Copa Libertadores performances. I think we got August, so we might see something, but honestly, there can't be a huge thing. But yeah, planning ahead for 2030. I mean, if you look at 4 years ago, some of the squad, you would have said they're nowhere near, right? Like obviously Orlando Hills won, but even I'm trying to think if even Cubas 4 years ago was really like considered. I don't think so. So I mean, there's a lot to happen. Honestly, what I'd be doing, not to be cynical, but I'd be looking at those dual nationalities because that is Paraguay's biggest chance of something a bit different. Because to Fede's point, he's not very pleased with the Paraguayan league. And the Paraguayan league is not going to revolutionize in 4 years that you have enough players from there. What we've seen is the Argentinian league does, right? Because, Canales is that example, but he's injured, but Ronaldo de Jesus could have come in as well. I mean, we've seen players go to Argentina and have a level that can work in South America or Brazil, right? Because also in Brazil. But there's probably so many dual nationals around in Argentina now that you could start to really work on and look at who are kind of 18, 19. And so in 4 years' time, could be like a Mauricio, I think he's 24. So, that I'd be looking a lot at that. We'll see. You never know, right? And CISO turns up, and you get these generational talents as well that might come through, probably from Libertad. We've still got a lot of left back. So we've got Diego Leon, we've got Blas Riveros when he comes back from injury, who's still not that old. So we've got a few other players, right, that missed out this time that could be there. But honestly, I'd be looking a lot at the dual nationals because there must be some untapped talent there that we could find ahead of 2030.
Fede?
Yeah, that's the direction. That's the way to go, guys. I mean, look at the new young kids that can make it and see if they can have a good friendly with the national team and make that leap to Europe. We're gonna need that, right? We're gonna need more players in European leagues. We need that market to start opening, especially after the kind of World Cup we had. Hopefully, those opportunities start opening up for certain players. I mean, I'm thinking of myself. Alcaraz, the center forward from Olympia, was called at a certain moment, and now he's rumored that he's going to go to Argentina. We want those players actually to make it to Europe, not to stay here in South America, right? I think that's the level that we need. But this is a talk that's been going on forever here in Paraguay, and we're never going to have that amount of players. So for me, it's just the coach needs to do his job. The coach needs to get the best out of everybody, and in those kind of games, they need to pass the test. So I think for this national team, it's going to be important to just keep competing against the best, get the best friendlies you can get, and put these guys on those kind of scenarios all the time. I want to play France. I want to play Germany. I want to play those kind of teams before we play the next World Cup. I think that's the way to take it to the next level. Compete with these kind of teams. So hopefully we can start having those kind of friendlies, and we can really take this team to the next level. I think that's what they need. That's what the coach needs to do, especially that we've never seen Alfaro, I think, manage a team so long. So that's going to be special. That's going to be interesting to see how the new chapter with Alfaro is going to happen, right? I mean, so far it's been our reaction. It's been this team more of a fight. Now we want to see if he can really make this team play better. So I think that's the question moving forward, and that's not going to be answered in September. That's going to take a while.
It will absolutely take a while and we'll have to wait and see. But of course, even though the World Cup ends for us, we still have Paraguayan League to focus on. It'll be coming back soon. The Copa Libertadores is back, the Sudamericana. So one thing before we close it out, I want to appreciate everyone from tuning in, during this entire World Cup. It's been a blast. We've had a really good time. We showed a lot of love to Paraguay, hopefully good love and not bad love from what we saw in France. But no, we appreciate everyone's support from all around the world, to me, to Ralph, to Fede, all of us supporting, all of us getting the support that we want during this World Cup, and that hopefully, that this continues on. Obviously, we do this out of the love of the sport itself and our love for Paraguay. And of course, we encourage everyone to try to donate as much as they can. You can go into the Buy Me a Coffee link that is provided in the description below on YouTube or on Spotify or anything. Any sort of support that we can get is that we can be able to do more content to provide and spread the love of Paraguay soccer on all fronts as we close on a great episode for myself, Roberto Rojas, Fede Perez, and Ralph Hanna. Thank you so much for listening in. See you soon.